We have the latest now on the search for two murder suspects in northern Manitoba. The RCMP believes Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski are still somewhere around the town of Gillam. Angela Johnston is with the CBC News team on the ground there. She joins us now live by phone. Angela, start by telling us what it's like there this morning.
Well, Janet, one thing that's quite noticeable here on the ground today is just how much the weather has turned. It's definitely a colder morning. It's wetter. It's been drizzling, and there's just kind of this dampness in the air. So when you think about that, you immediately have to wonder about these two suspects. As you mentioned, RCP say they believe that they're still in the area, but of course, this land here is extremely difficult. It's muskeg, it's forest, it's brush. So obviously, if they were somewhere out there in the wilderness, that would certainly be difficult. At the same time, people have told us that there are a lot of cabins and trails here that could perhaps provide some cover or provide a place to hide. But, it's quite chilly here, so you have to imagine that the elements are quite a challenge.
We're showing video now of a bright sunny day in Gillam, but that is video from other days. Last night there was heavy rain, I understand. So they're cold, they're wet, if indeed they are out there. What about the people from the town? They've found this lovely place to live, Gillam, where they normally feel like they can leave their doors unlocked. And now they have this giant presence of police descending on them. How are they feeling about what's happening right outside their homes?
Yeah, obviously people in this whole general area are still feeling pretty much on edge. We've had a few people openly worry to us and speculate. Your mind kind of starts racing, saying, these suspects, they could be anywhere. Could they be watching us right now? So there is still this broad concern. But some people are trying to, I guess you could say, take a bit of action. We spoke to a man from Fox Lake who's running a community patrol, just trying to keep an eye on what's going on. So there is still this feeling of unease and anxiety, but also, what you're really hearing from people is just that they're getting quite tired of this and really are hoping that this is resolved soon.
Angela Johnston, thank you for this.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Angela Johnston on the ground in Gillam, Manitoba. So what exactly goes through the mind of a fugitive in a case like this? For a look at what could be happening, I'm joined by criminal psychologist Erik Hickey. He joins us now from Fresno, California. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Let's begin with the process of profiling. How do investigators even begin to understand these suspects?
Well, profiling has been an interesting developing science over the past 35 years. And so it's about learning about criminal behavior. And we know more about criminals now than we ever have because of research and, of course, professional practice. So over time, we've pretty much figured out how they think, what they're going to do, their next steps, and so on. It's a process, and there's different types of profiling. There's geographic profiling, and criminal profiling, and victim profiling, and so on, in many different types. And we won't have time to touch on those too much. But so what happens is that law enforcement, they're trained to intersect these different types of profiling, where then they have a pretty good sense of the next step a criminal would take, depending upon the types of crimes that they've actually committed. And again, profiling is not designed to specifically look at a person per se, but it gives us a pretty good idea of what types of crimes a rapist would do or a murderer would do, the next steps in terms of hiding themselves and so on. And in this case, you've got a couple of characters who are on the run, and this is not a Thelma and Louise situation. They may end up, dying in the end in a hail of bullets. If that could be their choice, but often more likely is that they're going to end up ending in a whimper, where they will give themselves up, or they'll be captured without any shots fired. And we hope that will be the case and nobody else gets hurt. But I suspect these fellows are hiding out, laying low, hoping that things will die down. But as they run out of resources, they're going to make their next move. And yes, everyone should be consider this a very dangerous situation, because these people are dangerous. They allegedly killed 3 people, and if that's the case, then they could be very, very dangerous still. So
Let's talk about the dynamic of their relationship. What we understand is they have been friends since young childhood, since elementary school. I believe they worked together at the Walmart in their hometown. So they are great friends. They go on this trip. Purportedly, their parents understood they were going to try to find work elsewhere, and somehow this crime spree begins. How would that perhaps change the dynamic between two young men in a friendship?
Well, if they're actually telling them they're on the way to look for work, it may have been that that was never their plan to begin with. I think we have to consider that possibility. But as they ventured out, I mean, they probably left with a sense of nothing to lose, and they probably acted on impulse. I don't think that they probably left thinking today we're going to kill people, but when the opportunity came along to maybe rob them. And then ended up someone dying. And I suspect one of the two of the two ended up shooting these victims. Then once that happened, then all bets are off. That changes the relationship, and so one of them is going to be in charge of these two people. There's not a democracy. One of them is going to be making the critical decisions of where we're going to hide, how we're going to do it, and so on. I mean, input with the other person. So it'll be interesting to see once the RCMP and local police, they track these guys down, what kinds of, if there's actual negotiations, how that will play out.
And how could the dynamic of their relationship change the longer they're on the run under difficult circumstances? Sure.
So here's what could happen, and has happened in other cases where they decide, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. One fellow says it's just too dangerous. I'm afraid, and he could then leave, and they get split up and go separate ways, and that could certainly be a possibility. So I know everyone's looking for two people. It may have been, or it could be that in the near future that they split up and go separate ways. And of course, the police are aware that this is a possibility.
They must be scared. They must. I'm wondering about the fight or flight instinct that people have been talking about in this case. What does that do to how impetuous they could be, how dangerous they could be?
Well, there's certainly lots of bravado with people who feel like they have nothing to lose, and that also makes them very dangerous. But over time, especially if they have limited resources, then they get hungry. Hunger changes things, and so does the lack of amenities. And if they're suffering physically at all, that can sort of take the spunk out of it all for them. And certainly, but there is also this other piece that we've not discussed, but the idea that now they're somebody, now they're famous or they're infamous, and they're if they have gotten any wind of the national manhunt that's on for them, that could be quite a payoff for them. And as someone's mentioned, it's certainly they could actually go down in a blaze of glory if they had, or infamy if they have guns and they want to shoot it out with the police. But more likely that these are cases where they resolve, where they end up just giving themselves up because they've been hiding out for so long. But again, this is still a pretty hot area. There, it hasn't been long enough yet for them to change their way of thinking. So right now, I suspect there's still a certain height of excitement about it, and eventually, of course, that will change to how do we resolve this where we get a good deal. So they might want to make a deal. If it goes long enough, they could actually turn themselves in, but I doubt that, given that they've allegedly committed 3 murders.
Erik Hickey, thank you for this.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
That was criminal psychologist Erik Hickey joining us from Fresno, California.